So today we've been talking about all of our positive and negative numbers. We've been talking about adding and subtracting, talking about number sets, what categories they fall under. We've talked about how does this affect adding and subtracting fractions? How do we handle that? So the last thing left to do is talk about multiplying and dividing our positives and negatives. And we've saved this for last because it's really kind of the easiest one. There's just a couple little rules you need to memorize and you're all set. And it's nothing different from anything you've ever done before. So when you add and subtract, things are different than we're used to. Adding a negative is really like we're used to subtracting, and so on and so forth. So with multiplying, you're still going to multiply the numbers like you always have. It's just a matter of should my answer be positive or negative. And there's just a couple easy rules to memorize. So starting with the rules, if we multiply a positive and a negative, so what does that look like? Positive times a negative. That's always going to equal a negative answer. Okay, and that should make sense because a positive times a positive gives me a positive. So if I change something to the opposite, my answer should be opposite. So a negative times a positive. Negative times positive. It's kind of the same idea because if I had 5 times 6, that's 30. So if it's the opposite of 5 times 6, I should have the opposite answer. So again, a negative times a positive is a negative. But what happens when I have a negative times a negative? Well, if you think about this one, if this gives me a negative answer, and now I add a negative, the answer needs to switch to the opposite. So this is going to give me a positive answer. So basically, when you're multiplying or dividing two negatives, you get a positive. If only one of them is negative, then my answer is negative. So let's make it simple. Instead of 3 rules, let's make it just 2. So this is for multiplying and dividing. 2 negatives make a positive, and 1 negative and 1 positive in any order make a negative. And that's it. Once you memorize those rules, there's nothing new to learn. So when you look at number 1, we know what 5 times 6 is. 5 times 6 is 30. So if it's negative 5 times 6, or the opposite of 5 times 6, then it should be the opposite answer. So it is negative 30. Next one, 5 times negative 6. Well, 5 times 6 is 30. Now it's 5 times the opposite of 6, so it should be the opposite of 30, which is negative 30. Now negative 5 times negative 6. Well, 5 times 6 is 30. The digits are not going to change. It's still 30. But if you look at this one, 5 times negative 6, the answer is negative 30. So now if we add a negative, so the opposite of negative 5 times negative 6, then I must get the opposite answer of this. So it is a positive 30. Two negatives, when you multiply, make a positive. So what does this look like with fractions? Same thing. So just like I multiplied the 5 and 6 and got 30 before I even worried about negatives, that's what I want you to do here. Even if it looks like this negative is in the numerator, that's not what I want you to worry about. Just do 1/5 times 1/5. So 1 times 1, 5 times 5. And then worry about your positives and negatives. It's a negative times a negative. Two negatives make a positive. So my answer is positive 1/25. So this one, forget the negative for a second. Just multiply the numbers. 5 and 2 and 9 and 3. So I get 10 and I get 27. Now, this was a negative times a positive. So a negative times a positive gives me a negative. I come over here. Put it over 1 so you can multiply straight across. I'm going to get 8 times 4 is going to give me 32 over 11. You can leave this as your answer now. If you wanted to simplify it, you could. But this was a positive times negative. Well, if 2 negatives make a positive, but if it's one of each, this is a negative answer. This is a good answer. And again, if you simplified this, that's fine. Okay, division is the same exact thing. So division is super easy. Negative 10 divided by 2. We'll start with 10 divided by 2. We know that's 5. And then just deal with my negatives. It's a negative divided by a positive. If it's one of each, it's a negative answer. Because positive 10 divided by positive 2 is 5. So the opposite of 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. So how about this one? Deal with the numbers first. 15 divided by 3 is, again, 5. But this is a negative divided by a negative. So I get a positive answer. Okay, this looks like a fraction, but really this is division. Okay, every fraction actually represents division. So this is a negative divided by a negative. So I should get a positive answer. 2 negatives make a positive if I divide. And 20 divided by 4 is, again, 5. So all 3 of these answers are digits of 5. This one's negative because this one had 1 negative, 1 positive, where these both had just all negatives. Now, number 10. Division. Well, let's not forget, whenever we divide, we need to KFC. So let's do that first. Keep, flip, change. Okay, if you want to bring down the negatives now, you can. But really, I just want you to worry about the numbers right now. We'll go back and look at the original. For now, I don't care that the negative goes here. I just want you to do 4 times 3 and get 12, and 5 times 1 and get 5. And there's my answer. Now go back and worry about what was the negatives and positive. This was a negative divided by a positive. That creates a negative answer, so my answer should be negative 12 over 5. And if you simplify it, that's perfectly fine. It'd be negative 2 and 2/5. Both answers are fine. Make sure if you do simplify it that you bring the negative with it. The answer is negative. Okay, KFC this one. So keep, flip, change, multiply. You're going to get 8/9. This is a negative divided by a negative. That's a positive. Answer is just 8/9. Last one. Keep, flip, change. 16 over 21. Now go back. This was a positive divided by a negative. That should give me a negative answer. So notice, I'm not worried about my negatives until I've got my final answer. Just deal with the numbers like you always would. And then at the very end, go back and see, was it a positive and a negative, or was it a negative and a negative? So what should my answer be? That's it. Try your classwork on the other side. When you think you've got your classwork right, walk up and check your answers. The answers will not be on the Weebly. And then once you've gotten all that finished, show me your answers. I want to check them and make sure you've done everything right. Show as much work as you can, and then you can get your homework.